Farnese de Vandimion origins. Religious fanatic who becomes a prodigious mage and Casca's caretaker. Explored. You know, it's very rare that an author can take a character from an antagonist to a protagonist effectively, but leave it to Kentaro Miura to do just that with no effort. When Farnese de Vandimion was introduced to Berserk, she was the complete antithesis of the Black Swordsman. Bound to her duty by the chains of faith, she herself kept clenching onto it harder than ever, though it made her hands bleed and left her heart empty. But after meeting Guts and spending copious amounts of time nearly dying, she comes to appreciate her own powerlessness and emerges from her fanatical cocoon into the real world as an ardent follower of the Black Swordsman. Not only that, she manages to become one of the most prodigious mages to ever step foot on Elfhelm, and her role in the story seems to echo that of figures from the present and the distant past. Because it is clear that despite being betrothed to Roderick and bound by duty to her Vandimion family, Farnese has eyes for only one man, and her reconciliation of the fact that she can't have him the way she wants is what's going to make this story explode. But that's enough teasing, let's get down to talking about why this will happen. This is Farnese de Vandimion's origins explored. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. She's the commander of a religious military order, but it isn't because of her skills. Farnese's introduction to Berserk. When Farnese first appeared in the story, we weren't even sure if she was a woman, and would have stayed confused if we didn't read through that entire chapter. After the conclusion of the 5th eclipse and Griffith's ascension into becoming Femto, the lake where the Band of the Falcon was sacrificed runs red with their remains. To us, this is just the aftermath of the nocturnal feast known as the eclipse, but to adherents of the Holy See, it is a sign most ominous. A pilgrim mother and her daughter gaze up at the dying sun as it leaves the skies and pray to God for protection when the Holy Iron Chain Knights pass by. The mother is shocked to see the Holy See's main army rock up to the borders of Midland because the papacy didn't usually dispatch them like this. She didn't know that the Herald of Arms was practically ready to pimp her out to the vice commander of the order, who at least had some sense of pious duty within him. The quarreling duo was silenced by their helmed commander when one of their outriders came in with a message too ominous to ignore. In the scriptures of the Holy See, there is a prophecy which foretells the coming of a great age of darkness. It says that when the sun dies 5 times, a red lake will appear west of a city with a name both old and new. It is proof that the 5th angel has alit. He is the Falcon of Darkness, the master of the sinful black sheep and the king of the blind white sheep. He shall call down upon the world a terrible age of darkness. The commander of the Holy Iron Chain Knights made her highest-ranking officers end their tomfoolery because the Red Lake of Prophecy had finally appeared next to the city of Windham, which used to be the capital of Supreme King Geiseric's continental empire, and is the current capital city of Midland. The Holy Iron Chain Knights arrived at the scene of Griffith's eclipse and saw the results of the same, as the lake west of Windham City now ran red with the dismembered bodies of the Band of the Falcon. Their commander takes off their helmet whilst completing the final passage of the prophecy, and if Serpico hadn't called her a she before, we'd have never have guessed it was a woman. Lady Farnese looks up at the sky, wondering what the Age of Darkness will have in store for them, and gets her answer rather quickly in the form of a black swordsman. You see, in the 2 years following the eclipse, the Holy See had been receiving numerous reports from their rural adherents of the rise of evil spirits and monsters and such, creatures that the faith squarely confines to the realm of superstition. Of course, the Holy See could not spare enough resources to follow up on every individual report given the vastness of their following, but they did realize that each report had 2 things in common. The first was the appearance of a mound of corpses left behind in a grisly scene of pure carnage. The second was the mention of a black swordsman who was allegedly creating these mounds. The Miracle Recognition Department's rationale was simple and, when taken out of context, quite unassailable. Right after the eclipse, a man clad in black starts wreaking havoc throughout their territories, inspiring great fear in the masses. Surely this man was the Falcon of Darkness that the scriptures spoke of, wasn't he? In order to ascertain the truth, the Holy See had dispatched the Holy Iron Chain Knights to trail the Black Swordsman, which they had been doing for the last 2 years. Their hunt had led them to the tiny village that the girl Jill was from, where Farnese finally learns the Black Swordsman's location from the local priest. She commands her men to help the villagers with the burial of the many children they had made mass graves for, unaware that they'd been turned into pseudo-apostles by Rosine. The priest thanks her for her assistance. He can't believe the Holy Iron Chain Knights had been dispatched to an area as remote as his, but he also regrets that he can't send someone with her because of how dangerous the Misty Valley was. Just as he was musing about how he could help out what was quite possibly his faith's greatest holy mission, the local war vet Zepik walks into the chapel and offers his services. Farnese takes him up on it, and the Holy Iron Chain Knights follow Jill's neglectful father all the way to the Misty Valley, where they witness yet another grisly scene, near identical to the ones they'd been cleaning up for 2 years. The commander of the Holy Iron Chain Knights is confident that she was closing in on her prey, and grew so desperate to catch him that she ignored Serpico's advice about abandoning their search. Her zealous approach to bringing the presumed enemy of her faith to justice paid off when the fog for which the valley got its name finally dissipated and revealed the Black Swordsman's location. As commander, she used her booming voice to order the Black Swordsman to stand down and surrender peacefully or be taken in by force. But internally, she was terrified of the idea that he was the Falcon of Darkness. When Guts refutes her proclamation for surrender by pointing out that he had no beef with the Holy See, she accuses him of killing the children from Jill's village and uses his blood-stained appearance as evidence. Guts, of course, feels terribly conflicted by his actions as well at this point, so he doesn't deny her accusation, which leads Farnese to command her men to execute God's will and take him by force. Even injured and unable to swing his sword properly, the Black Swordsman is worth the entire Holy Iron Chain Knights put together as a fighter. He starts slaughtering the soldiers of the Holy See with relative ease, and Farnese castigates her men for trying to kill him because their mission was to capture him alive. The Holy Iron Chain Knights' miserable performance against a single wounded swordsman draws out curses from their commander and vice-commander, but their Herald of Arms remains unmoved. That's because Serpico knows that as a highly ceremonial order, the knights of this particular order were comprised entirely of nobility, who would rather stand on ceremony than ride into war proper. In fact, the Holy Iron Chain Knights were also called the Pretty Boy Knights colloquially, and Vice Commander Azan was the only one amongst them with any real battle experience. Farnese was their commander not because she was a badass female warrior like Visenya Targaryen or Galadriel from Lord of the Rings. She got that post because of how the Order's hierarchy was organized. As a ceremonial organization, the Holy Iron Chain Knights were never intended to be a proper fighting force. At best, they do defense for Holy See fortresses. Farnese became their commander because it was custom in the religion of the Holy See to appoint a female commander for the Holy Iron Chain Knights. She herself had no combat experience, and her rapier was mostly for show. This is why she was terrified of the Black Swordsman's onslaught on her men, because despite sporting injuries that would kill a normal man, he was out here cutting down half a dozen men in full plated armor with a single swing. As Farnese trembled at the sight of her faith's greatest enemy, Azan stepped forward and volunteered to deal with Guts himself. The former Knight of the Bridge gave the Black Swordsman a harder time than more than a score of his men had by this point, and Guts realized that if he wanted to survive, he was going to have to make an executive decision. His call was perhaps the most textbook response in a warlike scenario. He decided to take out the beast at its head and capture Farnese. The commander, who had never swung a sword properly, let alone killed a man before, drew her steel in an attempt to defend herself. Farnese closed her eyes and made a blind charge at Guts, which should have been easy for the Black Swordsman to deflect, but a well-timed branch throw from Serpico knocks him off balance and she manages to stab him with her rapier. The Holy Iron Chain Knights lose their minds at their commander's valor. She had managed to do what no one else could do for 2 years, and brought down the infamous Black Swordsman. But Farnese herself was shocked and still with fear. This was the first time she had drawn blood from an enemy with her own hands, and that fact was taking too long to sink into her bones. Azan notices this immediately and reassures his leader of the nobility of her task. Those who choose the path of the sword have a terrible fate to bear, but they must forever harbor the significance with which the blade is swung in their own hearts. Farnese had acted in order to bring down the man who was quite possibly the literal Antichrist figure described in their holy scriptures, and thus she must not flinch from her duty. The commander of the Holy Iron Chain Knights takes heart and orders a withdrawal, making her way back to the seat of the Holy See with her prize. But little does she know her entire life is about to be flipped upside down. Her austerity and harshness hides a cruel loneliness and a deep, perverse sense of desire. How Farnese's encounter with Guts changes her life forever. After making camp for the day, Farnese summons Guts to her tent and commands her men to clear the area and stay away. When her soldier starts babbling on about including Vice Commander Azan in the decision, she threatens disciplinary action against him for insubordination to the Supreme Commander of the Holy Iron Chain Knights. The man sheepishly makes his way out of the tent, and this is when it becomes clear why Farnese wanted the coast clear. She picks up a spiked whip and informs Guts that as the lowest member of the High Court of the Holy See, it was her duty to ask him a few questions before delivering him for divine judgment. She asked him 3 simple questions from her position. Number 1, Guts' origin. Number 2, the motivation behind his actions, and number 3, his purpose. If you guys want to know about these things, then check out our Guts Origins video, because people who have seen it will know that demanding things from the Black Swordsman is futile. This is a guy who eats dead spirits for breakfast and apostles for dinner. The fact that this woman, who could barely injure him, and that too thanks to her heralded arms, was presuming to demand answers from him was laughable. And laugh he did, as he noted that Farnese and her god must not be getting along well if she was this worked up this early in the day. She warns him not to blaspheme and asks him why he is armed like a small militia, carrying around a raw slab of iron which barely qualified as a sword. Was he an ordinary mercenary, or did he mean to start some kind of war? In the 2016 anime, Farnese's line of questioning also included the fate of the original Band of the Falcon, whose remains were found in the Red Lake of Prophecy. Though it wasn't an accurate depiction of this particular scene from the manga, we think it did a good job of tying Farnese's fragile faith into the exchange, because the entire reason any of this was happening was religion. The Prophecy of the Falcon was a secret oracle that was only handed down to high-ranking members of the clergy, local priests, common soldiers, and the people who adhered to the Holy See were not even privy to it. To Farnese, this knowledge made her feel important and special, and that's why this scene from Berserk 2016 is something we don't mind as much as we mind the overall animation. However, the interesting thing to note here is that it takes far less to piss off manga Farnese, because she doesn't even get to asking him about the Band of the Falcon. After accusing Guts of trying to start a war all by himself, she picks up the behelit he was carrying with him and threatens to get him tried as a heretic for carrying a supernatural object. But the Black Swordsman is not taking the bait. He asks Farnese if she has actually seen a god or a demon in her life, and, knowing her answer, tells her she's as hollow as the idol she worships. He declares he will neither confess nor repent, and so she should just say some musty old prayer for him and get on with it. Farnese did try to explain to him that God existed everywhere, and that his miracles were not so easily witnessed, but upon being provoked, she snaps. The Supreme Commander of the Holy Iron Chain Knights becomes a Spanish inquisitor and tears into Guts' chest with her spiked whip. It is clear that she did this because Guts called out her hypocrisy without doing so explicitly. Farnese clung to her station and faith like a drowning sailor because all she truly wanted was the illusion of power. She was powerless to actually accept the truth of God's existence or lack thereof, and this struck a nerve deep within her. She kept at her inquisition with a feral tenacity, and started to move closer to Guts for some reason when Vice Commander Azan finally stepped in. Turns out that guy from earlier snitched regardless of his commander's post, because Azan was horrified by what he was seeing here, but not surprised. He asks his commander why she was going as far as she was, and Farnese simply declares it to be her duty, and commands her men to take Guts away and lock him up after tending to his wounds. As the Black Swordsman is led out, he muses to himself that even the reputed Knight of the Bridge has to put up with things like this, when the herald of the group tells him to not antagonize his commander like that. This man, whose name is Serpico and whose origins are on our channel right now, tells Guts that Farnese can be quite charming if she wants to be, but this would not become evident until far later in the story. For now, all Guts is concerned with is exactly why these people were chasing him in the first place, and he has an idea about how he's going to figure it out. With Puck's help, which he profusely thanks him for, mind you, Guts escapes and makes it to Farnese's tent intending to kidnap her, when the duo witnesses something rather disconcerting. In certain Orthodox religions, it's not uncommon for someone to express their faith through extreme measures like self-flagellation. Turns out, Farnese was one of those people, and she was in the middle of her ritual worship, where she sought the guidance of God. Luckily for Guts, this also meant her guard was down, because she literally had her eyes closed and her hands clasped in prayer. So before she could even call for help, the Supreme Commander of of the Holy Iron Chain Knights was put out of commission with a well-placed chop to the neck. When she woke up, she was on the back of a horse, half naked and several miles away from the campsite. Guts greeted her decently enough given the circumstances, but Farnese was both livid and scared witless. Livid because this apostate had the nerve to capture a high-ranking official like her with such impunity, and terrified because of what he was capable of doing. Farnese repeatedly demands Guts to let her go, and nearly splats to death on the rocks below when she falls off the horse. Well, almost, because the Black Swordsman pulls her back in time. Puck apologizes for Guts and introduces himself to Farnese twice, but the second time he realizes that she can't perceive him. He pulls her lip to test his theory, and sure enough, Farnese thinks Guts is toying with her. Puck realizes that this woman cannot and is not even trying to perceive him, and this is important because, as a certain witch explains later on in the story, organized religion is the death of spiritual perception. The Holy See's interpretation of spirituality and faith, in which there was only one God, inhibits humans' inherent spiritual perception, and if they are true believers, then the act of disbelief makes them quite literally blind to higher spiritual beings. Farnese, at this moment, does not believe in anything but her one true God and his eternal mercy, but that perception is shattered real quick when Guts' Night of Terrors begins. Farnese thinks Guts is crazy for mumbling to himself about rigid worlds and such when something catches up with them. She thinks it's her men, but really it's the restless spirits of the dead who are attracted to Guts' brand of sacrifice. At first, she is confused because she can't perceive the malevolence surrounding her, but when she sees Guts slice a malign spirit with his dragon slayer in front of her very eyes, the veil starts to lift. She lets out a troubled cry because the horse was galloping too hard, and she had nothing to balance herself with, when Guts tells her to watch carefully as God makes them witness a miracle on earth. The Black Swordsman takes on his nightly terrors as determined as ever, but with all the extra cargo, his horse capsizes, and everyone is due for a horrific crash landing, especially Farnese. She braces herself for the end, but Guts saves her by breaking their fall. When she asks him why he did it, he simply tells her he has questions for her, as they get surrounded by a pack of possessed hounds. Guts continues to mock Farnese's faith as he starts talking down the demon mutts, but he is unaware that her faith has already begun to crumble. Farnese starts rejecting what she is witnessing with her own eyes and tries to run away while Guts is distracted. She is so terrified that when she reaches his horse, she orders it to allow her to mount it and ride to safety. And to her and everyone else's horror, the horse tries to, well, mount her instead. This is all you're getting from us on this scene from the manga, but you'll be delighted to know that Farnese was saved from a nasty ordeal by an enraged Black Swordsman who cleaved the horse in half. He then proceeds to spend the entire night cutting down the demon mutts over and over again, until the sun finally starts to shine. Farnese had called out to her god thousands of times in crisis, and in her life's worst ordeal, she couldn't even utter one word of prayer. Yet somehow the visage of the blood-smeared Black Swordsman struck her like a divine painting. She was about to break down at the realization of her powerlessness in a situation as dire as this, when of course, things get worse. The remnant of a malign spirit manages to cling to her before the sun fully rises and shows the reader the guilt that Farnese harbors within herself. The powerless are not entirely without sin, and Farnese herself was guilty of harboring a dark desire. She was a sadist who derived pleasure from inflicting pain onto others, and we do mean that the way you're thinking. Farnese was completely empty, so she clung to her position of power as a means of verifying her own existence in the world. Ultimately, she falls under the spirit's possession and spends the time until daybreak, straddling Guts' sword, let's say. And again, we mean that literally. When the sun finally goes up, Farnese is horrified by what she just experienced and lets out a blood-curdling scream. This allows Serpico to catch up with her, whom she immediately commands to kill Guts. When he reminds her that their mission is to just capture him and rejects her command, she slaps him and starts walking away. Farnese thinks to herself that if she doesn't kill the Black Swordsman, then he will let everyone know of her most shameful desires. And then everything will be over for her, which reflects the inner noble within her. Farnese's full name is Farnese de Vandimion. She is the only daughter of Federico Vandimion, the wealthiest and most influential man in the Holy See. She was born in a holy city and spent her entire life learning the gospel of God, but in truth, She was a neglected child whose parents did not give her the attention that would have given her a normal childhood. Farnese's father was always busy because of his position in the world, and her mother was a hardcore socialite who liked to spend her time at parties instead of babysitting her own child. She had 3 elder brothers, but all of them were destined to carry on the Vandimion name, and as a woman, her destiny was to simply be married off to some unknown man. As a result of all this neglect, despite having multiple servants at her beck and call, Farnese grew up practically alone in her family mansion. Over time, she grew accustomed to becoming the things that she feared as a way to express herself, and this caused her to gain a nasty reputation. She had run off many a servant and was known in her household as the Vandimion Devil Child because of how unpredictable she could be. But this all began when she partook in her first heretic burning. Farnese's room overlooked the city plaza, where such burnings were a nightly occasion. She used to be terrified of them growing up, until one day she attended one herself and felt a wave of power and pleasure overcome her. Farnese found in God an existence she could devote herself to find power from, and so she created her own shrine in her backyard where she would burn things that displeased her as martyrs to her faith. Her wild behavior abated to a great extent when Serpico entered her life, because the rescued puppy would withstand abuse that no other could possibly endure. But there was another reason for that. Remember that power and control are an important part of her story. So with Serpico, Farnese had finally found her perfect companion. She could feel the loneliness within him as well, though she is completely unaware of the fact that she is her half-brother. Perhaps this is why she fell for him and wanted to run away with him when her father arranged a marriage for her. Serpico, of course, rejected her recommendation. He knew that all she wanted was for someone to look her way and treat her with kindness, but he had also felt a similar degree of neglect for their father. And besides, there's the whole sibling thing as well, and despite being blondes, we don't think they'd get down like the Lannisters if Farnese discovered they were related. Serpico's rejection caused her to burn down a part of her father's mansion and revert to her old bossy self, where she would make him duel on her behalf after instigating a fight in the first place. Farnese's father sent her off to a monastery where she rose through the ranks with her fervent dedication to heretic hunting and eventually became the supreme commander of the Holy Iron Chain Knights. Farnese pursued her inquisitorial quest with particular zeal, bringing hundreds of heretics and their families to justice, including Serpico's mom. Her religion became a way for her to shield herself from the fact that she knew next to nothing of the real world, and so she was terrified of guts. This all changed when she entered the holy ground of St. Albion and witnessed the first true miracle of her lifetime. Broken and remade. How Farnese becomes the very thing she once hated and comes to admire the greatest enemy of her faith. Following her disastrous performance with the Black Swordsman capture mission, Farnese is reassigned to basically protection duty for an inquisitor in the middle of the Kushan invasion. And what's worse, this inquisitor was Father Mozgus. If you want to know why this is worse than facing war, famine, and plague, then check out his origin video on our channel. But suffice it to say that this guy is the Tickler from Game of Thrones, but on a potent pack of holy water. Given what we know about Farnese's personality already, it terrified us when we realized she was downright inspired by this fanatical madman. On their way to the Tower of Conviction, the Holy Iron Chain Knights are attacked twice. First by a band of vengeful peasants who sought to kill Mozgus, and then by some starving beggars who tried to steal alms. The first attack was swiftly subdued by Mozgus's disciples, and Farnese was right impressed with the brutal justice this Inquisitor administered on obvious offenders. But the second instance left her slightly conflicted. When her army rounded up the beggars who tried to steal from their carriage, she was determined to bring them to justice within the Tower of Conviction when a mother stepped forward with her dying child. This gave her pause and completely threw Farnese off her game because the human inside her didn't want to cause torment to her or her child. Father Mozgus stepped in and, in a seeming act of graciousness, allowed the beggars to accompany them to the tower so the mother's child could be saved. Farnese was even more impressed by his capacity to dispense mercy in the light of God than physical pain, but her perception died when she realized that Mozgus intended to torture every last one of them, even the child, when it was healthy enough. When she later finds him performing his daily prostration in the chapel, Farnese asks the priest about the meaning of their inquisition, arguing that killing so many people to suss out a few priest killers seemed like pointless torture. But the crafty preacher used the Holy See's scriptures to justify his actions and claimed that everything they did was for God, and God alone, which resonated with Farnese deeply. She received a blessing from him and doubled down on the Inquisition, practically making the Holy Iron Chain Knights Mozgus's personal army. But even this reaffirmation of her faith couldn't stand in front of the torrent of reality that was the Black Swordsman. When Farnese located the hideout of the Great Goat's heretic cult, she ordered her men to wipe out everyone indiscriminately, but was terrified when Guts arrived to save Casca. She was lost without Serpico, who had taken off to face Guts himself, and was told by Azan to retreat when she came upon Casca and Nina. Farnese took them back to the tower where Mozgus surmised that Casca must be a witch related to the Black Swordsman based on her report, and planned to torture her to learn the truth. And then the world of reason began to die. The malice of the tortured souls manifested as flesh-eating blobs of blood and flooded the Tower of Conviction. Farnese and Mozgus's party barely made it out of the torture chamber and legged it for the chapel, but in their rush they failed to notice the Black Swordsman, who snatched Farnese from their beeline and pressed her for Casca's location. Farnese was scared witless, but managed to tell Guts where Casca was, and when he started to leave her alone, she chose to follow him instead of returning to her comrades. Farnese had witnessed Guts fight and survive the entire incarnation ceremony, as he fought his way up to the chapel where Casca had been carried to by the demon child. When she saw Father Mozgus's pseudo-apostle form, she was stunned into silence, and it was from this point that her world began to change. After Guts and his party dispatch of Father Mozgus and his disciples, the collective malice of all the dead in St. Albion starts engulfing the Tower of Conviction. Farnese is convinced that they're about to die, and this time she's going to at least let out one prayer before she does, but she is awestruck by Guts' spirit to survive. He barks at her to use her hands to burn the blood blobs instead of praying. Farnese somehow survives the night alongside the rest of her future comrades, and at daybreak, she is one of the many people who finally witness a true miracle on Earth, aka Femto's incarnation into the physical world as Griffith. Farnese, like the Kushan and Zod and everyone else, is filled with a sense of reverence which lingers afterward, but not for the Falcon of Light. After escaping the invading forces of Emperor Ganishka, Farnese realizes that she wants to learn about the world where the light of the Holy See doesn't reach. She takes off her plate armor and her sword, symbols of her office, renouncing both that and her faith in front of Azan. Having secularized herself, Farnese declares her intention to follow the Black Swordsman to witness the truths of the world herself and figure out her place within it. Her initial assessment is that she is useless. Having lived a life of nobility, Farnese has never had to cook meat or wash clothes before. Neither has she had to spend nights by a campfire with no food in her belly and the snow freezing her half to death. After joining Guts' party, Farnese comes to realize her worthlessness when she can't even look after the regressed Casca and ends up getting lost herself on her first night with the Black Swordsman party. But all that changes when she meets the girl who would change her life forever, and that's Shirke. After almost being abducted by trolls and being saved by Isidro at the last moment, Shirke and Ivalira show up to save the trio, and Farnese immediately realizes that she is a real deal witch. At first, she is apprehensive because of her years of learning that witches were evil, but Shirke ends up saving them, which marks the beginning of her change in character. When the Black Swordsman party arrive at Flora's Spirit Tree Mansion, Farnese makes to apologize for her past as a heretic hunter, but Flora assures her that she bears no ill will. Instead, Farnese is given a silver surcoat and dagger to protect herself and Casca in their journey to Enoch Village, and the former commander of the Holy Iron Chain Knights doesn't know yet just how empowering these things were going to be in her new life. When they reach Enoch Village, Farnese is forced to relive her old life when she meets the village priest, who is just like her before she secularized herself, but this also marks the beginning of her new life. Farnese is moved by Shirke's invocation of the four elemental kings, and decides that she wants to learn how to use magic. She defends Casca from trolls using the silver dagger and clip-off, and finds a new sense of purpose by defending someone weaker than her. Slowly but surely, Farnese begins to turn her life around as she enters the realm of magic. But there is one last hurdle in her path. When Guts and his party need to find a boat to get to Elfhelm, Farnese ends up relapsing to her old life by volunteering to ask for a ship from her father. Her father, of course, ends up imprisoning her in her home again, and Farnese ends up agreeing to a blind betrothal with one of her brother Magnifico's friends, in order to get her own friends the ship they needed. But while she was immersing herself within the ghosts of her past life, two things happened that were rather different. Farnese was intending to stay at home and marry Roderick, and spend the rest of her life as a noblewoman in a distant court, completely abandoning her friends and mistress in the process. But she kept practicing the basics of magic, even when she was at the Vandimion estate, and when her mother told her she was proud of her despite not having been around her for the longest time, Farnese realized that there was more to her than she let herself believe. After Guts & Co. saved the Vratanis nobility from Ganishka's tiger Pishacha, Farnese rejoins the gang and reassures Guts that she merely wished to revisit her old life one last time. She helps the Black Swordsman party get aboard Roderick's warship Seahorse, after Guts' fierce fight with Emperor Ganishka ends with a W for him. And while there, she also learns how to cast her luminous body, which allows Farnese to fly for the first time in her life. When Guts and Shirke's assault on the sea god allows Bonebeard and his tentacle brethren to attack the Seahorse, Farnese invokes the 4 elemental kings and protects the ship, which causes the ever-poetic Roderick to dub her the guardian angel of the Seahorse. After reaching Elfhelm, Farnese learns that she is a prodigious mage in training because she was able to cast complicated spells without using a circle, which was pretty advanced for her experience with magic. She was chosen to help Shirke with the restoration of Casca's mind in the Corridor of Dreams ritual, and Farnese, with the help of a Father Mozgus-shaped washing stone, managed to fulfill Guts' deepest desire, seeing Casca back to her old self. In caring for the woman, Farnese had come to see her as a sister-like figure, and Casca acknowledged that bond after regaining her sanity. But it wouldn't be Berserk if things stayed okay for too long, and it's right after Farnese's successful journey through the Corridor of Dreams that Griffith attacks Elfhelm. She is currently on board Roderick's Seahorse, where she is helping Morda with the sick and injured survivors from the attack. But the situation seems kind of pointless. The Seahorse is being engulfed by a maelstrom in the ocean, and that was in chapter 371, which came out in December. It's February, and there is no word on when we're going to get the next chapter of Berserk from Studio Gaga. But it isn't Farnese's survival we're concerned with as much as we're concerned with what happens next. Because at this moment, Farnese finds herself in a very unique position which might seem too Love Islandish for Berserk, but it's guaranteed to be far grimmer in its outcome. She mirrors multiple characters in the story, and that isn't necessarily a good thing. How Farnese figures into the endgame of Berserk. If we're going to understand why Farnese is so important to Guts' fate, then we have to look at the characters she is mirroring. Not just from this life, but from 1,000 years ago as well. And keep in mind that all of this is speculation about things that can possibly happen in the story, so don't treat this as if it's set in stone. So it's clear that despite being betrothed to Roderick, Farnese is in love with Guts. Serpico has noticed this on multiple occasions, and she once had an outburst on Casca which pretty much proved that she was. Normally, we wouldn't focus on this like we didn't focus on it in our Shirke video because we think romance angles are overrated if not pulled off well, except Farnese's character also happens to mirror the very woman who is the sole object of affection of the man she loves. It is a well-observed fact that Farnese's obsession with Guts is parallel to Casca's former obsession with Griffith, where it borderlines on worship and is more than love. Whenever Guts compliments her for anything, she is overjoyed by it, and entering Casca's dreamscape only confirms her worst nightmare. She might care for the woman like a sister, but she found in her heart that she was ultimately jealous of Casca because Guts loved her and not Farnese. Poor Roderick isn't even aware of her attraction to him, as he himself is too bedazzled by her exoticness. But here's the thing, given everything we know about Farnese, do you really think she's the type who will actually just settle down quietly in a place called Stoffen with a guy who wanted to die either sinking in wine, women, or at the sea? Not really, do you? So now the question becomes, what more could she do in the story? And this is where echoes from 1,000 years ago start creeping in. We've established on our channel that Skull Knight used to be Supreme King Geiserik, who wore the Berserker armor into battle as a human before, so we're not going to get into that too much. What we will get into is Geiserik's relationships, because even there, we see 2 women pop up once again, Flora and the Lady Priestess of Cherry Blossoms. The Lady Priestess was Geiserik's lover in his human life, and she died in his arms during the ceremony in which Void was manifested as a member of the God Hand. She was a prodigious mage herself, and Flora was one of her disciples who grew close to Geiserik during their acquaintanceship and became a dear friend of his. It's possible that Geiserik and Flora had a relationship like Shirke and Guts, where she kept him from going insane under the influence of the Berserker armor. But you might be thinking, how does Farnese fit into all of this? Well, that's where Casca comes in, or goes out more accurately, because before his passing, Kentaro Miura revealed that Casca regaining her sanity was the end of Guts' current path. From this point, a third duel with Griffith was what he was working towards before his tragic passing, so Casca's role is left open-ended. As of this moment, She is unconscious and has been brought to Falconia by Griffith and Zod. It's quite possible that her regaining her sanity was for nothing because she has severe PTSD from the eclipse, so much so that she couldn't even talk to Guts without looking away from him. Imagine being forced to live with the man responsible for breaking your mind in the first place. But again, how does Farnese fit into this? Don't worry, we're not going to suggest she'll replace Casca. In fact, we think she might end up replacing Shirke, because there is enough foreshadowing that Farnese's magical potential far outclasses any other mage on Elfhelm. The life she spent denying the existence of spiritual beings culminated in her not even witnessing the prophecy of the Falcon of Light, which was seen by all adherents of the Holy See after she had enlightened herself. This detail has been added in for a reason. It's because Farnese will realize that Griffith is the Falcon of Darkness as soon as she sees him, and that is the point from where things will become interesting and frantic. By now, Farnese has completely abandoned her thought process that Guts is the Falcon of Darkness, but they haven't actually talked about why she was chasing him. That's a conversation that's going to happen eventually, and it will likely coincide with the revelation of Griffith's true form to his subjects in Falconia, because there is just no way that he can keep fooling that many people for the rest of their lives while being an actual demon in control of actual demons and being hunted by people who know and can spread that information. Farnese's word will especially have weight because people will remember her as the commander of the Holy Iron Chain Knights, much like they recalled Griffith from the 100-Year War. But the tangle that we can't undo here is how all this will end up involving Guts and Farnese. As of now, she is on the Seahorse with him while Casca is a world away, but Guts clearly only has Casca on his mind. Even in his despair, all he can think of is that everything he went through was for nothing, as Griffith took Casca from him anyway. Nowhere in his thoughts is Farnese present, and it's going to be interesting to see how she reacts when she realizes this. It's possible that as the more experienced magic user, Shirke could be forced to take care of some major magical disaster, and Farnese will be left with the job of bringing Guts out of his berserker rage. A luminous body allows you to witness a person's innermost desires and feelings when you're communing with them, so there's no telling how Farnese will react when she realizes she's firmly in the friend zone. Will she burn down the Seahorse? Will she run off with Roddy the Chad? Will she just accept it and move on? We have no idea, and all we can do is wait, just like you guys. Marvelous verdict. Farnese is the perfect example of a character doing a 180 and it making sense. Sure, she did a very stereotypical thing by chopping her ponytails off, and the Berserk fandom still hasn't forgotten long-locked Farnese, but the glow-up has been very real. Farnese has managed to truly expand her mind and become the very thing she once used to hunt down and burn at the stake. Her journey from Fanatic to enlightenment is about as good of a first step to atonement as one can take, but as with every other character in the story, we can't help but shake off this impending sense of doom when it comes to Farnese's future. Like we said earlier, all we can do is wait until the next chapter drops, but until then, let us know your thoughts in the comments down below. As always, thanks for watching. Have a fantastic day.